Hello, and thank you for joining. My name is Katie Kehoe. I'm an artist and assistant professor. I teach sculpture and expanded media at Florida State University in the Department of Art. I prepared this brief presentation to share with participants of Art Meets Science, a workshop for creative collaboration, which is facilitated by Cultivate Collective with support from Maryland Sea Grant. The purpose of this presentation is to provide you with a brief introduction for how contemporary artists address climate change in their work. This is by no means a comprehensive selection of artists who address this theme. I'm pleased to say there are many, many more artists who take on climate change as a subject of their work. So I hope you enjoy the artist's work that I've collected to share with you today. I also hope that you'll notice that the selection of artists, what you'll find is people are working within different forms. I think it's important to convey that someone doesn't have to be working in a particular form, such as photography or painting or drawing or video, to address this theme. And so I'm going to introduce you to, I've assembled 5 artists, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about my own work, which addresses climate change. And at the end of the presentation, I've assembled some resources, which you can use to learn about additional artists who address climate change and sustainability and ecology in their practices. So thank you once again for joining, and I hope you enjoy. All right, I thought I'd start by introducing you to Margaret Lejeune. Borrowing from her website, Lejeune's creative practice explores the relationship between art, science, and environmental studies. She's a lens-based creator, and she produces work that investigates shifting landscapes, symbiotic relationships, and photography as a medium. She received her MFA from the Visual Studies workshop in Rochester, New York, and she has exhibited widely, nationally and internationally. In 2023, she was named the Woman Science Photographer of the Year by the Royal Photographic Society. And she's also the founding member of the Women's Environmental Photography Collective and is the vice chair of the Society for Photographic Education. This is the piece by which Lejeune was awarded Woman Science Photographer of the Year for. It's titled Watershed Triptych. Prompted by the title, and depending on your knowledge of watershed maps, you may recognize some of the imagery before you. The 3 patterns visualized here represent 3 of the largest watersheds in the United States. At these watersheds, over the last 30 years, there have been an increase in algal blooms, which are known to be harmful to people, fish, shellfish, marine mammals, and birds. These dangerous blooms happen when toxin-producing algae grows excessively in bodies of water, which can be caused by an increase in stormwater runoff from factory farms, combined by sea level rise. Okay, so we know that the patterns represent the watersheds, and we know now something about the watersheds she selected to highlight, that being that these are 3 of the largest watersheds, and over the last 30 years, they've experienced an increase of algal blooms. But what of this hue? And what of the circular shape in which the watersheds are rendered? Um, well, the color refers to dinoflagellates, commonly known as sea sparkle, which are the same marine wildlife that generate red tide algal bloom. And the shape references the petri dishes Lejeune was cultivating them in. Yeah, you heard me correctly. She raised her own dinoflagellates and using the light emitted from them, developed these images illustrating these watersheds that some people may or may not be familiar with. This project is part of a larger body of work that she's been developing called Growing Light. Lejeune's interest in bioluminescent organisms began one day when she was sailing down the Chesapeake Bay and happened to see the water lighting up like blue fireworks, emitting dazzling light. It was stunning, and she was stunned by it. Immediately, as a photographer, she saw the potential for these organisms, for providing a light source in photography. And so the following, I mean, she kept thinking about it. She kept wondering about it. And actually, she planned to visit the same place the following year around the same time, to hopefully observe the same spectacle and maybe capture it on film. And when she returned, she was disappointed to see that it wasn't there. She no longer observed that spectacle in the Chesapeake Bay. And so when she returned that fall to her academic position at Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois, she decided to apply for a grant, which she was awarded, to study the capabilities of bioluminescent organisms in the field of photography. And just to share this quote with you, this is a quote from Lejeune. These cross-species collaborations reflect my curiosity and wonder of the natural world. By harnessing the fleeting light of dinoflagellates, bacteria, and other glowing species, I ask the viewer to consider our connections to these tiny creatures and the importance of working toward a non-human-centered world. I hope that will give you some insight into what drives Lejeune in her creative practice to follow these questions that pique her curiosity. And so she set out to grow dinoflagellates in petri dishes in her studio. And obviously, she couldn't do this without consulting with some experts in this field. So to help her better understand the needs of these organisms, she reached out to bioluminescence specialist Dr. Edith Witter of the Ocean Research and Conservation Association and Dr. Jim Sullivan of Florida Atlantic University's Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute. With input from these scientists, Lejeune was able to successfully cultivate these organisms in her studio and carry out her work. With this example, we can see what results when art meets science. Deborah Jack. Deborah Jack is a multidisciplinary artist who works with audio video, installation, photography, painting, and text. Very multidisciplinary. In her work, she investigates the intersections of history, cultural memory, ecology, and climate change. Jack is based in St. Martin in the Caribbean and Jersey City, New Jersey. She completed her MFA at SUNY Buffalo and has exhibited widely across the United States. She has upcoming exhibitions that include Constellations, Racial Myths, Land and Labor at the Esker Foundation, and the Prospect Sixth Triennial, which is titled The Future is Present, The Harbinger is Home. So things to look out for to see more of Deborah Jack's work. And I've got this example to share with you. So in this series, Jack explores how sea level rise and the intense, frequent storm surges that result from hurricanes affect the shoreline and ultimately frame the fluidity of water. At times, these gestures, this framing is subtle, such as peeling paint and eroding concrete that results from frequent flooding and exposure to salt water. In this largely black and white photograph, you can see that it's punctuated with this strip of amber color. This color strip punctuates wear and tear, charging the image with an intensity that is contrary to the warming effect of that kind of orangey brown hue. Instead of warming us and making us feel some degree of comfort, it's jarring. It brings the image forward into our reality, while the black and white pushes it back into the past, as though we're watching our reality slip away because it's being eroded, and it's being overtaken. Because sea level rise knows no boundaries. It knows it will make its own shores. Water is fluid, and ultimately it will go where it needs to go as much as we try to control it. And so this series that Jack has created called Intertidal Imaginaries, The Resistant Geographies of the Shore in the Aftermath of Saltwater Surges, explores that reality. And when you look closely, you can really see the enduring nature of erosion and saltwater corrosion. Erica Jajewski. Erica Jajewski is a multidisciplinary artist and working primarily in graphite on paper. Her work documents the loss of animal species, specifically focusing on animals endemic to Canada, which is her country of citizenship. Uh, Jajewski contends that the issues surrounding the erasure of the animals she renders are global and affect all life, regardless of national boundaries. She received her BFA and MFA from the Savannah College of Art and Design, which also known as SCAD, in Georgia, and is presently wrapping up a PhD in environmental studies at York University in Toronto, Canada. I met her. I was fortunate enough to meet her last month. We were both curated in an exhibition by Virginia Shore and Sarah Tanguy, which was the title of the exhibition is called Mother Earth, and it was held at the Meridian Center for Cultural Diplomacy in Washington, D.C. And a little bit about this show, there were 18 artists who were participating, and all of whom showcase the critical role that artists can play in shaping the climate narrative. And so I was really pleased to have the opportunity to meet Erica at this exhibition. And this is the piece that she was presenting at the exhibition. Um, you may recognize that this depicts a beluga whale, which frequent the St. Lawrence estuary, which is among the deepest and largest estuaries in the world and marks where the St. Lawrence River meets the Atlantic Ocean in Canada. What is difficult to discern from this documentation photo is the scale of the artwork. And I didn't include the size on purpose on the slide. This piece is massive. It is 9 by 12 feet in size. And so it looms in front of viewers. And the reason why she carried it out on such a large scale is because it's important to Erica that she articulates her subjects on a one-to-one scale so that they are represented in life size as to really draw attention to their um their nature and quite literally like how much space they take up. And okay, so let me move on because I want to show you a detail of this work. Upon closer inspection, you can see that the graphite drawing is rendered through repeated applications of chemical formulas. If you look closely, there might be some that you recognize, specifically H2O. I think many of us know, oh, that's water. Yeah, I remember that from chemistry in high school. Okay. Um, well, you might also recognize others if you're more familiar with chemical formulas and what they equate to, such as there are formulas in there that equate to mercury, PCB, and DDT, all two common chemicals found in the carcasses of beluga whales. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the species that Erica selects to depict are animals at risk of extinction. And returning to a point that I mentioned earlier, she selects species that are found in her home country, in Canada. And the reason for that is that, you know, she sees herself as sharing the land with these animals. And if we're finding these chemicals in these animals that we share the environment with, well, what's inside of us? What's our chemical makeup now? And so it makes people think, and it's quite jarring. And I mean, this is particularly tragic because these animals are on the verge of extinction. And so this really puts into perspective how pollution has impacted their life cycle. And we have a hand to play in that. And surely something can be done about it if we take action. Okay. Xavier Cortada. And so since 1994, Xavier Cortada's community-driven artwork has catalyzed over 25 acres of ecological restoration, generated participatory eco art projects in every Miami-Dade County public school and library, and amplified marginalized voices across the world through collaborative message murals. He was born in Albany, New York, to Cuban immigrants and was raised in Miami. And in 1986, he earned his BA from the University of Miami. In 1991, a master's in public administration from the Miami Herbert Business School, as well as a Juris Doctor from the University of Miami School of Law. He was a lawyer. And by 1997 onwards, he was starting to carry out public art projects. And following 2007, he was focused on using his art as a platform to raise awareness and engage the public to connect with how our climate is changing. I'm going to share an excerpt from this TED Talk that Cortada presented in 2002. In the talk, Cortada recalls how in 2006 he had the opportunity to travel to Antarctica as part of the Antarctica Artists and Writers Program, which is funded by the National Science Foundation. He reflects on the conversations that he had with scientists on this trip and how crucial those discussions were for helping him to realize just how serious the climate crisis is, in particular for his home city, Miami, which is highly at risk as a result of our climate changing and sea level rise as an effect of that. He goes on in this talk to discuss two of his art projects, the Underwater Project and the Reclamation Project. By talking about these projects, he demonstrates the power of socially engaged art to bring about change. If you've never heard the term socially engaged art, what it refers to is art that engages the public to participate, acknowledging that it is that process of participation that is the art. So actually the engagement element, that's where the art is in socially engaged art. It's that participation. And so let's watch a bit of this video, and please, I've got the link here. You can watch it in its entirety. It's an excellent video, and I'm just going to play a couple minutes from it. Okay, so bear with me while I move screens.
Now, I've been trying to ask, how do we best engage the public around climate issues? Just a few years ago, I worked with the village of Pinecrest to develop a socially engaged art project that would make sea level rise impossible to ignore. We called it the Underwater Homeowners Association. Let that sink in for a second. We used those Antarctic ice paintings as the backdrop for yard signs that would map the elevation of people's homes. People would use an app to find out how many feet above sea level their homes are. And then they would either paint that number on a yard sign or take home a pre-made one, and they would place it in their front yards. Now you can imagine when your neighbor from across the street asks you what that number 8 in front of your house means. It's a perfect opportunity for you to tell them that they too live at 8 feet above the sea, and it is in their interest, in their personal and financial interest, to understand the consequences of a warming planet. The strangeness or weirdness of these signs, remember, these aren't political signs, these aren't home for sale signs, these are elevation markers, is a key component to a socially engaged project that makes random people stop long enough to ask, what is this about? And it is in that way that many of my neighbors realized that although they lived farther inland from the ocean, they weren't necessarily less vulnerable to the rising seas. You see, in Miami, elevation generally increases as you move inland until you hit this ridge. And then it starts dropping as you approach the Florida Everglades, the River of Grass, or what I call Miami's second coastline. As these yard signs were popping up, house by house, block by block, I worked with schools to paint 4 street intersections with their respective elevations. We called that road Elevation Drive because it showcased the elevation of a neighborhood, rising as you drove inland and then dropping after you crossed that barely noticeable ridge. And as if being flanked by bodies of water on both sides wasn't enough, Miami has a third coastline. It's the water beneath our feet in the aquifer. This is where saltwater intrusion is presently threatening our drinking water. And it is the reason why, when it comes to sea level rise, dams are not a solution for Miami. You see, my city is built on porous limestone rock, and the water will just come up through it. Now, as information about our project started getting out, all hell broke loose. People started calling the mayor's office. What are you doing? How are you supporting a project that's going to inherently diminish our property values? And the realtors were aghast. How are we going to make sales in the neighborhood? This backlash, this desire to hide a number that's in every single one of our flood insurance documents, made the city officials actually reconsider the support for the project. But by then it was too late. The project had broad community support. Hundreds of signs were all over the neighborhood. People wanted to do something. So we convened monthly underwater homeowners association meetings where people came together and they learned from relevant scientists and experts and practitioners, and ultimately began planning for its future with faulty septic tanks and risky real estate and water that would rise, but unlike a hurricane storm surge, will not recede.
Okay, I'm going to stop that and I'm going to go back to the presentation. Okay. So we heard a little bit from Cortada about his recent project, the underwater project. And you can see how it shook the area. Realtors, politicians started to question, but it was too late because it was so successful in engaging the community. And people started to learn how they were affected by climate change and how this is really something that we should be talking about and we need to acknowledge so we can move forward with agency. Okay. And so now let me go on. I wanted to talk about another one of Cortada's projects as well, which is the reclamation project. And this was inspired by his his trips to the Florida Keys and observing Florida's mangrove forests had been removed to make a room to widen the highway. And so he thought that to be devastating and was inspired to pursue this project, to conceive of this project. And what it involved was working with botanists and leading a group of volunteers to collect mangrove seedlings, which were then placed in water-filled cups and displayed in the windows of city storefronts for the duration of a year. And this was like commercial city storefronts, where people go to shop, and it's like full-on commercialization. And so volunteers approached the stores, told them about the project, asked if they could hang some of these cups with the mangrove seedlings in the window. There was a little sign that accompanied them, so people passing by could be informed, what is this thing? They might not even recognize what it is, and then learn about the mangroves and learn about the project and this initiative of reclamation. And so after a year there were 2,500 seedlings that were placed within the community in these storefronts. And after a year, they were all collected, and volunteers, once again, assembled to plant them. And so all of the seedlings were eventually planted along the barrier island of Key Biscayne. And similar collaborations in additional locations followed in the years that followed this initial gesture. And it's just, I love this image. I love seeing all of that greenery, knowing that those mangroves are getting planted. And so I thought you might also want to see some more photos documenting that project. Here are people collecting the mangrove seedlings, and this is when they're planting them. Angel Faz. Angel Faz is influenced by culture and relationships with place. Their work focuses on racial justice, politics of water, queer identity, and the reclamation of public space. They're a multidisciplinary artist working primarily in printmaking, video, animation, and digital projection. And they create work that confronts social injustices by generating spaces of resistance and affirmation. As a queer, gender fluid, Indigenous person from Dallas, Texas, Faz is committed to cultivating a practice that invites others to dream of alternate and more just realities. They hold a BA in visual communication from Collins College in Tempe, Arizona, and have exhibited throughout the Southwest of the United States. Recently, as an artist in residence at the Santa Fe Art Institute for the Changing Climate Artist Residency, Faz started working on a project that encouraged viewers to look at waterways as communities. So during their time at Santa Fe Art Institute, they created this piece called If the Water Could Talk, What Would She Say? And for this, Faz reflects on how specific waterways were moved for the convenience of development initiatives, noting that it was carried out without consent from the river. So the rivers were just subject to the whims of whoever had the deepest pockets and the power to determine where a river should be. And so this is a question that is raised in this particular piece. They document their time spent with the river and moments of noticing how the river changes over time. They acknowledge the river changes through the seasons and arrives at the question, what makes a river? Regarding it ultimately to be a community. They suggest the characteristics observed in the river have much in common with people, in that people too come from different places. And ultimately, we find ourselves in the same place from time to time. And when we do, perhaps we might consider that there's something we have in common with those who we share that space with. And so this is something that Faz proposes in reflecting on the river and what they observe in the river and how it relates to our experience as human beings. And if only we think of ourselves as having that in common, then we might actually see ourselves as being in community with those people that we share space with, regardless of their differences, where they come from and how they identify. Significantly, Faz sees aspects of themselves reflected in the characteristics of the water, of the river, in particular, in that the water is fluid and they identify as gender fluid. And also in how the water has been treated as an entity that can be used, taken from, remodeled to fit the needs of others, rather than an entity to be celebrated, embraced for all that it is, which unfortunately has something in common with how many people are treated in our society and how we fail to embrace the differences, which make, which why do we not celebrate the differences of those that we share space with? So these are questions that Faz asks in this piece. If the water could talk, what should she say? And they're questions that are arrived at by reflecting and observing the water and relating to the water. And so I'm going to play you a short excerpt from this. So bear with me while I navigate to that screen. Thank you. And this was produced by the Santa Fe Art Institute. This is an excerpt from.
Is a community bound by physical borders, unique experiences, and common values? What happens when a community is lost, removed, or abandoned? What are the joys and the struggles of being a part of a community and or trying to keep one together? How might being a part of a community inform or change who we are as individuals? A river is a home, a river is an ecosystem, a river is also thinking about as a resource, and it's treated as a very unlimited, bountiful resource. So I've been also thinking about the river as a means of, it feeds agriculture, it feeds, people, or we have fresh drinking water that's converted from groundwater. And what does it mean if you're looking at a river like a checkbook? A very infinite source. Does it run out? And so I've been looking at time-based drawings in the river that I might draw in the sand and think about what it means to have a resource and what it means to have a river, and how we engage with the river, how we look at water as a resource here and everywhere.
Okay, thank you. And I'll go back to the presentation now. Hopefully you enjoyed hearing from Faz in describing some of the questions that are kind of guiding them in developing if the water could talk, what would she say? Okay. And Faz is also a printmaker, and so I wanted to show you some of their 2D work. And so this is actually carved wood, watercolor and ink, similar panels similar might be used to create prints. This is a piece in and of itself. And I wanted to give you kind of sometimes also even the materials that artists use is very thoughtful and relates with sustainability. And Faz offers a great example of that in some of the materials that they use in their practice. In this image that you're looking at, Faz is processing Akokeisha prairie grass prior to cooking it and blending it down in order to make paper. And this was featured on the website that is noted there, where I got this quote, the Southwest Contemporary website, regarding Angel Faz's work. And so just getting back to this image, Faz uses natural elements collected outdoors as materials in their practice to carry the themes of their work, whether it's natural resources and how we treat and manage our natural resources, the loss of Indigenous knowledge, and the politics that govern our experience of a place. So hopefully you enjoyed learning about Angel Faz's work. All right. I also wanted to talk briefly about my own work. I've been addressing climate change and sustainability for over 10 years, and I work predominantly in socially engaged performance, site-specific installation. I create survival architecture, objects, and wearables that function as props props in my performance pieces or elements in my site-specific installations. And so let me start. And so this is a series of 5 portable wildfire shelters I designed and created during a residency last spring at the Santa Fe Art Institute. It was the Changing Climate residency. I was also thrilled to be able to participate in. Sadly, I wasn't there at the same time as Faz. I would have loved to meet them. Each of these shelters is approximately 7 feet by 20 inches by 36 inches. And they're part of a new body of work that I began last January in preparation for this artist residency. I wanted to develop a body of work that had some connection to Santa Fe and New Mexico. And so I started researching what extreme weather are they experiencing in New Mexico. And I learned that a year earlier, they actually had the largest wildfire in recorded history, when the Calf Canyon and Hermit's Peak fires merged to burn over 40,000 acres east of Santa Fe. And so I decided that I would create these shelters that I started calling survival architecture. And these are not functional in that they're not meant to be used as wildfire shelters. These are symbolic. They're intended to encourage people to question the increased frequency of wildfires and the increased intensity of these wildfires that we're having, and how these are being caused by our climate changing, and whether or not we're getting to a point that we actually might need to carry something like this around with us. And these were inspired by the wildfire shelters that people that fight fires use. I didn't know about these when I thought of it originally, and I was like, I wonder if this exists. And I learned that they do exist. And so I created a material combination that has the same surface appearance as these. They're not made of the same material. These are made by NASA, so they're I don't have access to those materials. But I do want to acknowledge this as an inspiration for my work. Um, I also made the series of 6 wildfire shelters for small animals. Each unit measures 33 inches by 33 by 17, and they can be configured in different arrangements to respond to the landscape and what I imagine the needs of the small animals at that area might be. And and the reason why I made it for these small animals is because I understand that small animals are more vulnerable to wildfires because they can't move as quickly. Um, and so once I had created these survival architecture pieces, I access this map of where the fires had burned, the footprint of the fire, and I went driving in and out of roads to access the burned areas. And I was looking for places to install and to set up temporarily the wildfire shelters and document it with photography. And so this is an example of, taking one of the portable wildfire shelters for people, uh, installing it. It doesn't leave a footprint, so it's there. I take photos of it and then I pack it up and I remove it in its entirety. So I'm very respectful to the landscape when I'm carrying out these site-specific installations. Here's an image of 2 that were installed together, and in the titles I include the GPS coordinates. So technically, people could actually go and visit the locations where these installations were carried out and documented. And this is a photograph of the wildfire shelters for small animals. You can see the configuration is slightly different from what was illustrated in the first image. And yeah, so that's just a little bit about my work, which in the last 4 years has been addressing wildfires. Prior to that, I was working on sea level rise. And so again, similarly with that, creating props and objects that I reflected on as survival objects and wearables. And so as you can see, there are many of us that are using our art as a platform to engage in a conversation about the climate crisis. And on that note, I wanted to share with you some more resources. And so please check out these websites. There are many more artists who address the climate crisis and issues related to sustainability and ecology. If you are interested in working with an artist, maybe it's because in your practice, you're addressing a similar theme that they are, or you're just drawn to the aesthetic of their work. And so you think that maybe they have an interest in collaborating with you on a theme that is maybe a mutual meeting point, but not something that both of you address directly. There's no harm in reaching out and making that contact. You never know what it could lead to. And hopefully from this presentation, you'll see that science meets art and art meets science, and wonderful things can happen when that happens. And so these are 3. Obviously, you're familiar with Cultivate Projects. I'm a part of Cultivate. We're working with Sea Grant to lead the workshop, Art Meets Science. Cultivate is an evolving collection of interdisciplinary artists, writers, and researchers driven by investigations of landscape, place, and the commons. Atlantika Collective is an international creative collective of 9 involving artists, curators, critical writers, educators, and thinkers who believe in social responsibility, community, and nurturing a contemporary humanism through art. And for the last 3 years, they've been producing a series of exhibitions that address the climate crisis. I'm a part of each of these entities, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it, part of them. Finally, Ecoartspace, which is so large, and it's so wonderful to see that there are that many artists, led by Patricia Watts, the director of Ecoartspace. This is a national platform for artists addressing environmental issues, and there's a database of artists on that website. So do check it out. Don't stop here. And I hope this was of interest, and I hope it piqued your interest and inspires you to maybe collaborate with an artist who you find you have some things in common with. Finally, thank you for listening, and please stay in touch. Here's my contact information. Follow me on Instagram. I post pretty regularly. Check out my website and reach out and let me know who you are. Okay, thanks so much.